Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Colleen. It's 2 minutes past 2 o'clock. I'd like to start the webinar, and the others will join us as they and when they can. So thank you, Colleen, for joining us at the unearthly 5 a.m. in your part of the world, the northwest of the United States. And we're extremely privileged to have you grace this webinar. So, Colleen, just to introduce Colleen to you, Professor Colleen Carmean is the founder of the Higher Education Consortium Ethical Analytics Group, and she is a strategist for analytics, e-learning, and new pedagogies. Her research is in emergent learning and focuses on systems that bring together discovery, the user experience, and assessment. She also teaches critical thinking and applied computing. The current research includes, amongst others, the practice of predictive analytics in student success and applying the value of nudges in improving learner decisions and success. Dr. Carmean has served as an EduCase NL2 Fellow, a Fry Fellow, a Arizona Teaching Fellow, and the University of Washington Tacoma Writing Fellow, as well as a recipient of the WCET Innovators Award. So quite a decorated persona, Colleen, in addition to being a distinguished teacher yourself. So, Colleen, if we could allow you an hour and a half for the session in total, or less, depending on the audience participation. So you utilize the time in a flexible, interactive way, and we will humor you with our participation. Thank you, Colleen. I hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunpath. I am so delighted to be here. I wish I could be with you face to face. I so love South Africa, visiting, working with people who are doing just amazing things right now in analytics. I had hoped that a few of them would come to the seminar from WITS, and I would hear their voices again. Maybe that will happen. I am excited about, I'm not a great lecturer, so bear with me. I am excited about sharing what I have been doing, what my group has been doing, the Ethical Analytics Group, to really push an understanding not just of data and what we can do with it, but what we should consider and be careful about doing with it. So what I would like to do is, I'm sure that I've been told that everyone has access to the chat, which should be at the bottoms of your screens. I would love it if people just put in their name and a short description of your role, whether it's in data analytics, student services, institutional research. It would be really good if we could see who we have gathered here today. I don't see anything coming up in the chat, so it might not be turned on, or I don't think it's the case that people don't want to reveal themselves, but let's, while we're doing that, I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started and tell you about what I have been doing with data and why this session is called Why Data Matters for Student Success in a Post-Pandemic World. And I here we go. Now we're rolling. You've already heard this. I was introduced very well. I just wanted to add to that some of what I'll be talking about is based on a research paper that my colleague Laiso read and was interested in. And also we, in 29, before the pandemic, we, my co-author and I, did a handbook that really dug into what's happening all, at least around this country, and a few voices from around the world in the use of analytics in higher education. So I like to start out talking about analytics by turning to Leo Tolstoy, to go back that far. And something he said in Anna Karenina, all happy families resemble one another. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And I love that quote because in analytics, it is so important that when we use data in ways that we've never been able to do before, to look for patterns that we haven't been able to see with our traditional statistical methods, that we recognize that those patterns we find really need to be analyzed by a new kind of practitioner who understands that even though we see clear patterns, know that each of that pattern came from individuals. And when we take insights that we haven't seen before and we turn them into actions, we really have to understand the implications of our actions and to be a bit careful about that. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the slides, but I love this quote. And, I ask my colleagues to understand that data represents individuals with individual struggles, needs, places of being. So one of the things that we talk about in doing analytics is the process that can almost be a loop as we continue to think about it. And universities have always been good at collecting data, right? I mean, we have responsibilities for reporting how many students showed up for our fall term, how many men, how many women, what degrees they were seeking. We have the data. We've been very responsible about reporting it out in traditional institutional research ways. What we haven't been very good about doing is taking that data and applying tools and processes that allow us to explore insights into our own institution, into what we may be doing right or wrong, what we may have not been noticing, that would allow us to improve our own institution. It's I say often when our students fail, it's really our policies and processes that are failing. So how do we take new insights and do right action with them? And then, just importantly, look at those actions and make sure that we understand the impact. My university did a deep dive on student success initiatives, and we found that we had 200 of them. And even the programs that had begun those initiatives had never closed them, had never analyzed them. So no wonder that some of us are not seeing the impact that we could from our hard work. So I think analytics gives us a framework by which we can better understand what's ahead and do a better job for our students. So in my work, one of the things that I have been trying to concentrate on is in doing analytics, a practice that has been, that I have been involved with for more than 5 years, both in the practice and the research, is what have we learned so far? And how can we share amongst ourselves the successes and failures of the impact models and logarithms we put into place? How can we share information about how doing analytics is a new practice that demands a combination, a collaboration of skills that that really defines new campus roles. I have an interesting chapter in the analytics handbook that I mentioned, where my vice chancellor and I explore how, when we implemented analytics on our campus, we failed to understand the roles that would be needed. So we kept changing who was responsible for moving our analytics initiative forward, because people who had been assigned to that project based on old roles, based on their roles in IR, based on their roles in the student services group, based on their roles in technology, weren't prepared for a totally new way of looking at data and moving those insights forward. It's a tragic chapter, but we were very honest about how we failed at each step along the way, not understanding the need for a new professional. And interestingly, and I'll ask people in this group, if you haven't, once we talk about that, if you have a name for that, if that role. So one of the other things that we find so significant in the practice of analytics that was never true of, say, institutional research, that just by their role alone, that they stay independent and objective, and they try not to they try to show that they are not influenced by internal or external stakeholders, right? There's a purity and an objectivity of just reporting data. But once you move into insights and then taking action, you really need to have as many experts in their own field at the table as possible. We'll talk about that a little more. And then culture, data cultures, new data cultures, they are hard to create and they are hard to maintain. Everyone on this session knows that change is hard, especially when you become an expert in your field and your practice. Then how do you become part of a new movement in data that demands a very different culture of collaboration, consensus, insight building, and convincing your administration to change something that is not working, that you have found out for the first time is not working. These are questions that just fascinate me, and I think we need a new understanding of our community of practice to answer them in thoughtful and successful ways. So if you're familiar with the Gartner Group, they do some fascinating analysis and future casting of higher ed and its movement forward. And they have great hope for analytics and some real doubts about how the present structures will adapt to the changes in culture we're talking about here. I like this chart that they put together where they talk about hindsight, insight, and foresight, and how we move from information to data that's gone through the kind of logic interventions and predictions that analytics allows. So they talk about how we have centered our work in the past in descriptive analytics, in gathering together the data of what happened, who enrolled, what the demographics are, and then looking more deeply at is there a population where something happened that we could figure out what it was? Is there, for instance, a course in the first year that a large population has trouble with, and could we change that course in some way, which would be diagnostic analytics, right? Could we change that course to make for better student success at that moment for a certain population or majority of the students? Then predictive analytics is where things started to become very to become such a rich possibility, because we actually have the tools to ask, based on the pattern that we now have access to, what will happen based on seeing what has happened in the last 4 years of a population, and noticing that something happened along that to that population. Can we predict that it will happen again this year? And what can we do about that? Or can we predict, based on what we saw in the last few years, can we predict what we could do to make that more successful? And then somewhere along the line, which no one is doing very successfully, but we're looking at it, is the field of prescriptive analytics. A colleague of mine, a brilliant colleague who is the technician on the paper that we're going to talk about, why data matters. Dave Keel says that we are on the forefront of prescriptive analytics, or causal machine learning, where we can, based on what has come before, we can make change happen by changing the institution, by really doing, as I say, deep dives into new ways of looking at the data. So that's what the Gartner group has come up with in terms of an understanding of what's been happening so far in a look at value over difficulty. Then Mark Milliron, who was the head of Civitas Learning, where I have spent a lot of time using as a tool, talks about it a little differently than Gartner, which also, he says that in the past, that data, that IR look, that type of reporting that we used to do, he calls systems of record. That's our SIS systems, our CRM systems, our institutional research reports that are demanded by our entities, systems of record. And that is where we collect data, but it doesn't give us the kind of action response engagement that leaped forward once we got into the 2000s. And everyone has seen that, with the student involvement we see when the LMS or mobile applications are used in new ways. And that engagement by them allows us to see what they need, what they are doing in ways that allow us to understand more. But coming up is a prediction, much like Gartner's, of prescriptive analytics that Milliron calls systems of intelligence, where signal processing, predictions, that machine predictions allow us to know students not just in real time, but in not just in real time, but in predictive time. To be able to see patterns and know that it is the institution causing those patterns, so it's the institution that could respond with action, right? I think that there are patterns emerging in our own use of the data, as well as patterns in the data. So we go back to Tolstoy now when we want to talk about how do we, as new practitioners, prepare ourselves and move forward. And one is, we have done a lovely job of sharing our understanding, but it's really important to know our campus, to know our students, and to be prepared in that way to be representative of the students, of your own students on your campus. Knowing them gives us such a unique chance and a responsibility, right? Another piece of the puzzle that is new to our community is preparing the data. And the uniqueness on that is analytics allows us to see things we didn't look at before. So it is really important that you have consensus on your campus regarding determining in-scope and out-of-scope variables. There's a lovely chapter in the analytics handbook written by my student research assistant, who did a survey of the students of what they found acceptable for us to be looking at, and what they as far as integrity and ethics said, we know you have this data, but we do not want you reporting out on it. And we don't want you to make this available to our faculty. We have concerns about you using that data. And each campus, this is what we found interesting too. Once my student Avery published that in the handbook, the University of Washington decided they needed to do that survey, that kind of survey, they didn't use his, on all 3 campuses. And indeed, that was very prescient, because we found that because our students have a different profile, you know, our main campus is a Research One institution. Those students had very different concerns about ethical use of data and in-scope variables than my own inner city campus that was more community oriented and less Research One, less the students unlikely to go on for master's degrees, and very different. So I think knowing again that idea of consensus and collaboration, students have to be involved in that. Know the end at the beginning. It helps from not floundering. Know what your achievable data goals are. You may not know what you're going to see in the data, in the patterns, in in the insights you come up with, but you know the framework, know the outcomes you're working toward. Be careful of project scope creep, and you can go down that rabbit hole of insights and it's very, very difficult to come out. I mentioned to a colleague that this is the first time in my career work that I would start looking at a pattern, an insight that surprised me. It would be 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would look up and it would be 7 p.m. and I would have forgotten to go home, and I would be hungry, and I needed to make sure my dog got walked. In pattern seeking and insights is very different than reporting, and you need to indeed put a fence, put a framework around what you're attempting to do. And there's no point in doing it if you don't have a commitment to action based on those insights. You are wasting smart, valuable people if all that comes out of it is reports. So part of the project and that collaboration is to make sure that you have commitment, responsibilities of your leadership and of your teams, that you're going to move forward from the data all the way to action. Right. So know that when you create an analytics project, that you have the 4 stages of development thought out and ready. So I call that an analytics maturity index. Do you have the leadership? Do you have the commitment that these tools that are complicated and a new way of looking at data, do you have the people, the technology people to do it? Do you, once you are ready to go, do you have the policies, the ethics policies, the processes, the changeover in responsibilities through each of the 4 stages? Do you have those in place? Do you have so if you have the people and skills and tools, do you have the values in place? Is your culture ready? Are you ready to make that investment? There is a interesting project that has been done by in the US. It's a National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, a totally different kind of community of practice, where they have been looking at the implications of using analytics, and they have been very thoughtful about segmenting what they know as student services, student affairs, into understanding of the pieces and parts that come from their own expertise, into how to advance insights. Once you see the patterns, how do you apply it to what you know about the students? So this is they're doing really good work that you might be interested in, especially if you're a student affairs, student services person, and to know that it's not the analytics practitioners that can tell us how to move insights forward, right? So this is another type of community that needs to be at the table. We work. Here's that notion of commitments again. We were working on a project, my own campus, where once we had initiatives in place to apply what we were learning about our students, we divided it into a timeline. The design and ideation that comes out of practice of analytics is ongoing. but you need then to, in that action phase, to take and turn to your advisors, your counselors, your student services professionals, and help them design pilots that seek to put those insights into practice. And then if they work, and that's really important, if they work, then to scale them and optimize them for implementation across the campus. Here's back. This is just, I put this in so people have an understanding of, for my own campus, and then one has to look at how much that is, how much you can move that into the macro for campuses in general. What can we do once we have that data by coming up with actions for them? And some of the data we saw, this probably won't surprise you until you look more deeply at what we saw, but these are student groups that have been presented as risky target groups in the past. Analytics allows us to see a little better under the hood, but our student services team they put these together. They have long been looking at what initiatives we could move forward with academically underprepared, undeclared, still not choosing a major and wandering. Of course, first time in college students. Transitions are hard. A first time in college is one. Students, we have students that go to community colleges and then on to university. That transition is hard. We lose students then. Students that are struggling academically. We have more and more adult learners coming back to college that struggle with a whole different set of demands on their time and resources than traditional going year students. So each of them, you'll be able to use analytics to look more closely at pain points where they struggle. And you'll also see new risk groups that you hadn't seen before on your own particular campus. So my colleague Loyoso read my research paper with Linda Baer and Dave Keel, where we did something interesting with analytics. Before, it's always looking back a relatively short period of time, because student populations and cultures and times change. What we had been doing before as a community at large is going back about 4 or 5 years in your student data, right? And then looking at all sorts of different subgroups of students, or students taking certain courses, or students in certain degrees, and predicting what the present students would experience based on the last 4 or 5 years of a same population. We did something different in the pandemic. As you know, we were all in a state of crisis. So we used de-identified data from the Civitas learning platform. All the universities gave us permission to peek at not the demographics that we were usually looking at, but they uploaded pandemic initiative responses, whether it was to get laptops to students, whether it was to get Wi-Fi into the homes of students, whether it was to get food to some students that had lost their jobs, right? So 17 institutions participated in uploading live data on 44 different pandemic programs And we got the data term to term. And so over 2 years of the pandemic, what did we see? Instead of looking for old patterns, we were looking for how can we help students now based on what we're seeing of these programs? How do we do analysis of what happened? And some of it was surprising. Some of it, a good student affairs person might have guessed, but guessing is not the same as having the data. We found out that students were more likely to stay if the advising and counseling groups went into emergency contact mode and reached out and made sure that they knew how all the students were doing. And so there was some fascinating results of that in terms of across these 17 institutions, students who were dropping out versus the implications of really letting students know that the university was worth of them individually and that they cared. Students were much more successful in the programs that had reach out on providing Wi-Fi, providing laptops, providing funds, emergency funds for students who had lost their jobs in the pandemic, and even food to drive past the campus and pick up food. One program delivered food to homes of students that were contacted and expressed the need. Students did better where there were programs to bring them together to socialize in any ways that were possible, setting up collaborative online study groups by major, by course, by special interests. We were amazed at how much better fraternities and sororities did when the universities had programs that kept them connected. That made a huge difference. So we were doing not retrospective look backwards at patterns, but we were doing term-based impact analysis with the same software. And we had really interesting results that gave us quick feedback on a very difficult time, this pandemic, where where our students were just out there all alone. Anything that could be done to make them not feel alone really helped. We found evidence that those programs were effective in retention. So one more thing that if you have not read this book, it is delightful. And Thaler won the Nobel Prize for his work in this. It's called Nudge. It's a very simple book to read, but it has influenced my campus greatly on how to move forward into that action phase. And once you find a struggling population, then the ability to take action by setting up what Thaler and Sunstein call nudges, which is some kind of messaging that informs students, doesn't make them do anything, but informs them on actions they can take that would be of positive benefit to them. The book is a wonderful set of case studies on how you can improve outcomes by just positive messaging. One of my favorite is here in the United States, you have to put on your driver's license when you get it, whether you're willing to be an organ donor, but it's done state by state. So the 80-20, it turned out the 80-20 rule applies. States that make you check a box if you don't want to be an organ donor, they have 80% participation in organ donor. States that make you check a box if you do want to be an organ donor, guess what? That number flips, and 80% are not organ donors. Why? Because we're in a hurry and it's just about checking or not checking the box. So this is the way we can, there are other just fascinating examples like that, where we can improve outcomes by design of nudges, right? And we've been trying to use that logic in ways of influencing students to make the right decisions, right? You know, a simple thing, a very simple thing is students, how do they not remember? How do they not know that when you register for classes early, when registration opens, you're most likely to get the classes you need at the time you want. If you wait till the end, it's very possible that the class will be full and you're set back in the pursuit of your goals. But nudging students by sending a simple message to their mobile phone, if they're upperclassmen that need these classes and don't have flexibility about staying on course, you see this surge in enrollment into their courses when registration opens, if you've just sent them a nudge that says, if you need a certain class to stay on track, today's the day to do it, right? We've been doing little things that improve outcomes just by thoughtful nudging students in the right direction. I like to say that analytics needs a number of different roles, and one of them is a person who is responsible for the privacy, security, and ethics of the use of analytics. And this is a complicated role. One really has to be good at gathering collaboration and consensus, of understanding implications, and of communicating with the campus how important it is not to put these tools into the hands of people who haven't thought out these issues. And one way of thinking out these issues is having consensus built policies in place. And it is surprising and disappointing how many campuses who get so excited about the possibilities of analytics, how many campuses don't take those actions in meaningful ways, and are surprised when you have security slips, or when mistakes occur. I'll tell you one of mine, because it wasn't tragic, but it was I am very sorry about it. Our movement forward on nudging, and that example I just gave, our movement forward on nudging, and how students don't keep track of when registration opens. So we're knowing how important it is that upper division students get the classes they need. We implemented a mobile app messaging of what, as I said, of sending them a nudge saying, now's the time, blah, blah, blah. And we didn't know that the registrar had not entered the data for students who had passed their checkpoint, completed their courses, and were going to graduate at the end of that quarter. And so those students who had filed application for graduation got the nudge. You should be registering, which some of them knew that they had filed, they were okay. Others assumed that message meant that their application had been turned down. And so the registrar was flooded with calls, emails, and visits when that came through. We caused a certain amount of panic in students who shouldn't have gotten that message, and the failure was in again not having a team that really understood collaboration, so that someone from the registrar's office, in looking at that pattern, would know that, would be able to ask the tech people, wait, I thought we did this by hand. Where is the data that tells the system not to send this message to people who have filed for graduation? That's just a tiny, not too much harm, not too much foul. Other stories are much more difficult. One campus told a story of how the registrar, based on data, was able to send messages to students who the quarter before had a lower than a C, lower than a 3.0. And without collaboration, the registrar was trying to do good. She sent a message to all those students that if they were intending to drop out, it would be better to file notice of it instead of just dropping, because it would be easier for them within a quarter or two to be accepted back in. But the job that the message the students got were, you're doing really bad, you should drop out. And many did. So that takes that takes us into responsibility, have an ethics policy, have checkpoints where other people approve actions taken, because the action part is complicated. One of the issues is you have so many people at the table, right? You have data researchers and analytics practitioners, and you have student services, and you have IT, just the data itself. And so when it comes time for action, whose job is it? That needs to be a role on campus. And that's a very different job than what we just talked about with the security, privacy. Once we have an insight, how do we take action? And my chancellor said, we have to think this through, because when it's everyone's job, it's no one's responsibility. And the analytics initiative fails. It fails past the insight, because sometimes taking action means stirring things up, right? So someone whose job it is, who knows that this is their role and they must do it, is the person that has to be high enough up in the administrative leadership that once the team of technicians and implications people come up with a need for a change, an initiative, a movement forward, then there is someone who takes that and runs with the ball, as they say, because there is an obligation of knowing. We cannot just have insights that there are populations that are not doing well and not act on that, because that action might be difficult. So there is talk about how an institution or an environment struggles with that, because when you move forward, there is a shadow culture that doesn't trust change, that doesn't want to change, and you have to, and so that role for the person taking action has to understand that, has to have an emotional intelligence and a leadership perspective that understands the hidden impediments to success, that resistance is often just about fear of change and not about analysis or reaction to change itself, right? So that is something that it winds up in conversation about analytics. So I'm interested and excited about a community definition of the new spaces in analytics, in understanding new ways of looking at data, at the data scientists that actually create the algorithms and code for pattern matching and insight generation. There's a fellow named David Snowden who's doing excellent work in describing frameworks for sense making, and he says that a new career, a new role are the sense makers. I find this a fascinating work that he's doing right now in that. And I say there's a new role for action designers who understand collaboration, consensus, the student population that is in a particular campus, the profile of the students, and already understands from advising, counseling, what works, right? So those are the people that will wind up being the action designers. And then there will be, again, that job we talked about, who moves it through the campus and understands how hard change is for many, and makes that work. I'm fascinated that as we come into this practice that can really change student success, that can really change an institution, that we don't even have names for these roles yet. And if till we name these people and create descriptions that are that work for the jobs ahead of us, we will continue, as I did on my own campus, to give that responsibility to the wrong people, right? And to people who are so good at what they do, but asking them to do something very, very different than what they've done in the past. One example that we talk about in the book is in the beginning, analytics was given to IT and IR, information technology and institutional research, and the IT people did just a fantastic job of designing the system based on analytics practice, but they were not able to find the insights, because that takes a way of looking at data. I said after seeing this in action that it reminds me of the paintings that came out about 20 years ago, where you had to slightly cross your eyes and relax your mind to be able to see the whale in the bunch of blue dots, or, here the silly, complicated pictures. And there's a little fella named Waldo, where you're supposed to find him in the picture. That's a little bit of what analytics is like. And not everyone can find Waldo, and shouldn't be asked to. We need names for this new practice. And here is my last slide. I love to end with this, because what I've described of new practice suggests that it is very, very hard. And so sometimes I turn to the Pulitzer Prize winning poet Mary Oliver, who wrote a lovely poem called "To Be of Use." And I will subject you to it now. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums, but they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. The work of analytics ahead of us is so real, and it will make so much difference in the lives of students. And we should embrace it. So I am going to wrap with that. And we have some time left for questions. The chat is now up and running, and I would love to either start with Dr. Dunpath and see if he has something he would like to focus on as we move forward, or my colleague Loyuso. I did
Yes,
that wrong.
thank you very much, Colleen, for
Yes.
the nudges, for the very interesting nudges. By the way, I've ordered my copy of the book already.
Oh, excellent.
So thank you, colleagues. And let me once again welcome you, and a special word of welcome to our colleagues from other institutions around the country. So there's a few questions that are emerging in the chat. Ladies and gentlemen, you are at liberty to raise your hand and engage directly with us and with Colleen, or you're welcome to use the Q&A and the chat for your comments and questions. So Bonza wants to us to apply our mind about the conflict or the tension around students' concern about confidentiality, the use of the data, and the institution's obligation to use such data to foster student success. So how do we resolve that tension?
I'm going to go back and say, go back to Tolstoy again, and the idea that every unhappy family is unique and different. And I'm going to say that is the same for a campus. And it's very possible that you already have someone on your campus who can field that tension and has the both campus culture knowledge and the strategic knowledge to move conflict through, to move that tension through. If you don't have someone already on your campus that has that role in a different way, then you need to find that person. You maybe your campus has never been aware before of how deep that need is in the time of data, right? And so I think that is a piece of the puzzle, is to know the roles and who is in those roles. That's my best pass at an answer.
Thank you, Colleen. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any further comments or questions? I think we've covered most of the comments in the Q&A. And there's no new comments. Oh, there's one coming up in the chat. No. Nombolelo thanks you for this fruitful session, Colleen.
It was a delight.
Even at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Even at 5 a.m. in the morning. I would be happy to talk to you anytime at 5 a.m. in the morning. I see a few people from WITS have shown up, so I'm glad to see my old colleagues there.
Mm.
Hi, Diane Grayson, you're on the top of the window. There you go. We did really good work there. And yes, I've been following some of the work coming out of South Africa in this way. And, you know, you're inspiring. So some of these insights that I have, you know, it comes from the work that we're all doing. I see I love the comment in the chat by, I do such a bad job with names, but Mabongi, who's talking about moving into descriptive analytics with ambitions of climbing the ladder to descriptive, right? That we all are trying to make sense of these new frameworks that are emerging. And we have to do it together, and we have to be really honest about the mistakes that we make, and hopefully, like, they're not terrible, right? Hopefully they're not terrible. Hopefully the registrar doesn't try to do good work with a nudge and then winds up you know, accidentally encouraging students to drop out. And hopefully you don't send a nudge like I did that panicked students who are already on application to graduate. And I'm going to keep doing with those hopefullys. Hopefully that the person who has the role of the sense maker that David Snowden talks about, that person that takes insights, that those insights are applied appropriately to the population, right? Machines allow us to see patterns of data that we have never seen before, but then what do we do about them? And, you know, how do we interpret them correctly? And more than just what do we do about them, how do we make sure? Hello, Kevin, it is good to see you. I don't see you in the picture, but I'm delighted you're here. WITS, the people at WITS could talk about this same thing, about what they've discovered and the work they're doing. But one of the things that it's so important that we share is how we apply the framework in ways that do no harm. Right. And so that I mentioned in my slides is another role that I think is crucial. Come up with the names for these and know the descriptions when we hire to intentionally do that. And I'll tell you one more quick story from my own institution. We had a great team, but we failed to have that person that moves to action despite the shadow culture that doesn't want that to happen. We came up with an incredible insight at my institution that young men are struggling in the way we teach, in the small classroom heavy involvement lecture. Why did it surprise us that young people who are now coming out of the womb with electronic devices in their hands have trouble listening to lectures, and men more so than women? There's an amazing book I just finished. So if people want some recommendation on reading to influence how we think about moving forward, I don't remember the name of the author, but it's called Stolen Focus. And it is about what electronics have done to our brains, especially young people. We see that at my university in young men disengaging from classes that are heavy lecture. We reported that finding to our leadership that, here's how we saw it in the pattern, that young men who took young men under the age of 21 who took a hybrid or online course, this was before the pandemic, a hybrid or online course, were 7% more likely to come back the next term than their same population of people who did not have technology infusion in their classes. We reported that to our administration, but what does that mean? It means that we need more hybrid and online courses. Our faculty were not prepared to think about switching in that way, to redesign their courses. Well, then the pandemic hit, so now we'll see what happens. But we do need that person who can say, wait, this is new data that we are not serving a certain population of our students well enough for them to succeed. It's our job to change, not theirs. So that's just one more example of when you do have an insight or a finding that is clear, who is going to take the leadership on accepting the implications of that?
Colleen, we have a question from our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Law and Management Studies, Professor Brian MacArthur. Brian, won't you ask the question live to Colleen?
He may not be able to take his mic off, but I can.
Thank you.
There you are.
I've just managed to. In the chat, I did want to say thank you very much indeed for the honest sharing and the practical focus that you've made on on insights and actions. But from an institutional point of view, I was wondering how one builds that culture of holistic ethical analysis, across the institution. It's a tough question, I guess. But how does one start? What are the small steps that one would take to start such a culture building process? Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question because it gets to the very heart of how we move forward. And that is, you need leadership at the very top to say, we will live with the implications of what we find, and we will take action. That's what I was saying. You need a role for that officer, right? That if it's someone's job, they will work on doing it. And that's what my chancellor said. If it's everyone's job, it's no one's responsibility. So at the highest level, whether it's the executive vice chancellor of academic affairs, that's who was responsible for it at our institution. She knew it was her job to hand responsibility for change to she would pass it out to the appropriate person, right? So our nudge software was in the hands of student services, and they had to decide, here is information. Can we somehow help our students by getting information out? That was one little piece. And they put together a team that designed the nudges after we found out that one individual cannot write a message. They can't, because they'll make a mistake. I made a mistake. It's so we had teams writing the message, signing off on them. The team gathered every week to look at what they could do. Like, that's a simple one. Just our vice chancellor gave that job to a department in student services, and the software, the campus bought the software. we failed at the insight that we were not serving young men well with the lecture, and that certainly until they got into the majors, we should have made a change. They gave them the option that put them in technology, at least one technology infused course per term that would keep them engaged, right? We couldn't do that. Why? Because we didn't have someone whose job it is to make sure that got done, to live with the implications that it's a Pandora's box. You're going to open it up and you're going to find insights that you don't like. And if at the highest level of the institution, there isn't a commitment to change the institution instead of change the student, why make such bright, talented people in the other roles even do the work? That's my depressing answer, Brian.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Colleen. Ahmed, you have had your hand up for a while. My apologies. Please go ahead and ask or make a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make 2 points. One is I'm very impressed that you can make a diagnosis of a problem at the time that it's virtually occurring. I've found that students who have such a problem, if it's not solved, the rest of their semester gets wasted. That's one point. And the second one is, can a department or a unit itself do this analysis on its own? I work in clinical skills with a group of very, very enthusiastic people, but a lot of the other departments within the same years that we teach aren't as enthusiastic. Can it be done by a single unit or department?
Well, wasn't it Margaret Mead that said, never underestimate the ability of one person to change things? Basically, it's the only way things get done. So, on an optimistic side, I would say absolutely. Indeed, if you don't have a culture that allows for change, that really, my colleague Diane posted just now in the chat, we have to stop blaming students when we are not offering what they need, right? And so if one department, based on an insight on their students, can make a change for their students, then that is certainly the way to go, right? The group that we're finding an insight on doesn't have to be something like young men. It can indeed be upper division students in a major that they're a wonderful researcher in analytics at the University of Arizona, using this same platform that we've been using, Civitas Learning, found out that third-year nursing students were dropping out in the second term. The solution was so simple. The nursing students are often women with children that they go back to school for nursing degrees. They were offering that the faculty had put together the schedule where 2 instructors who teach in that term both like to teach evening classes from 6 to 9. So even though they were in their third year, women with children were gone they were probably working during the day anyway, they were gone from their homes from 6 to 9 p.m. 4 nights a week. And rather than somehow letting the institution know that this is impossible for working mothers, the women, a great deal of the women dropped out. And this is, and because the University of Arizona had that person who had the ear of the president, they found that insight, and they changed the very next term. They told those faculty they can't do that anymore. They can't. We have to accommodate the students we have. It was not a failure of the students. It was a failure of the institution not to know their students. And that's, that. How do you know your students? And here's a tool, analytics, that now allows us to see pain points and do something about them. And I hope that answered, through a sense of story, I hope that answered your question, because I leaped into that nursing example because it breaks my heart. And I was so happy that their head of analytics, Angela Baldesteri, was able to do something about it and then show us in a conference, what a difference it made.
I think you answered both my questions.
Thank you.
Points with one answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
I
Colleen.
appreciate that.
Can we go back to the Q&A, Colleen?
To the what?
Kayla asks the Q&A. Kayla asks, can we use analytics if students object? And then there's another question based on your pandemic study. And Bongi wants to know, how mature were the 17 institutions' data analytics cultures?
Great question, because let me talk about that study. The study was not done by the institutions. The study was done because the institutions allowed us access to de-identified data. So the study was done by my brilliant co-researcher, Dave Keel, who was able to apply the Civitas learning algorithms in a different way than had ever been used before, right? So the 17 institutions uploaded data regarding and it's a special program in Civitas, allows them to define new projects. So define new project, getting students Wi-Fi into their homes. Then the next quarter, being able to look at, did they come back, right? So the institutions didn't have to do the analysis. They just had to provide Civitas with the data describing their initiative to help students in crisis in the pandemic, and whether the students returned the next quarter versus students who did not take advantage of that option, students that didn't need that option, right? So it was actually Dave Keel who did the analysis, and him and I and Linda Bear looking at the results so that we could come up with insights. And I said that I would make my slides accessible. The last slide is that paper. And you know what I can do is really quickly, I can go ahead and, if for people who want to take a look at it before, if I can do this. Yeah, I will pop the paper address right into the chat window, because it's fascinating, right? And thank you so much for that question, because I didn't make clear that those institutions didn't have to do the analysis. We did the analysis of the 17 institutions. All they had to do was, I think that's it. Yeah, there you go. It's in the chat if you want to read it. That research project of using it, and I talked about it because it's using analytics in a new way. It's not looking in the past. It's looking at almost live data from term to term to look for patterns of success, and that's what we were hoping to find. But yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen. I think we've exhausted the chat and the Q&A.
Okay.
And so on behalf of UKZN and the other institutions represented here today, let me offer you our heartfelt thanks for making time to be with us. And we hope that participants here can continue the collaboration with you in
Yes.
whatever way possible. Thank you once
Excellent.
again.
It was delightful. Thank you. Wait, Sue says she didn't.
That's fine. That's quite okay. We will copy that link and
send it
share
out.
it by email. Yeah.
Okay, and I will indeed send you a copy of the slides. So anyone that wants to look at that again, look, anything that wasn't clear, hopefully, if I went too fast, you can go back. I so love talking about this and sharing, and I hope our community continues to share ideas and possibilities. I just wish I could be there in Durban to do it with you face to face. But
Well,
I think
who knows?
those days may be over for a while.
Well, let's keep trying. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank
Bless you.
you.